"Pick it up, old man." Richie Gallo smirked, kicking over a tray of freshly baked bread. The 22-year-old punk watched as Adekunle Adebayo, the diner's 50-year-old Nigerian owner, slowly bent down to gather the scattered pieces. Richie's two friends laughed, blocking the door to the empty Lagos spoon. "My boss ain't happy, Ade. This neighborhood is for Americans. Maybe you should take your juju and your burnt chicken back to Africa." Richie shoved Ade, who stumbled but didn't fall. Ade's eyes, usually tired and gentle, held a stillness that was deeply unsettling. He simply looked at Richie, his face a mask of calm. What Richie didn't know was that those calm eyes had stared down warlords and terrorists. In 60 seconds, Richie Gallo was going to discover he'd just tried to bully the most feared man he'd never heard of. Adekunle Adebayo had been running the Lagos spoon for a year, and it was a slow, uphill battle. The small diner, nestled in a forgotten corner of the city, served a mix of American comfort food and Nigerian classics. Most of his customers were regulars, who appreciated a quiet place and a kind word. There was Mike, the old Irish-American mechanic from next door who was addicted to Ade's spicy jollof rice, and Sarah, a young single mom and waitress who saw Ade as a father figure. They saw a man ground down by life, an immigrant with a heavy accent and calloused hands who worked 16-hour days. They saw a man who was patient, kind, and maybe a little too quiet. But the real Adekunle Adebayo was buried deep. Before he was a diner owner, he was known by another name, the Ghost. For 15 years, he was the Nigerian DSS's top operative, a man who could dismantle entire criminal networks without leaving a trace. He'd hunted kidnappers in the Niger Delta and infiltrated terror cells in the Sahel. His current life was supposed to be his retirement, a quiet promise he'd made to his late wife. He was here to watch, listen, and stay invisible. But guys like Richie Gallo were making that very, very difficult. Richie was a small-time enforcer for a local crime boss who wanted Ade's property for cheap. The goal was to scare Ade out of business, and the harassment was getting worse. One morning, Ade arrived to find the windows of the Lagos spoon shattered. Another day, racist slurs were spray-painted across the front door in ugly, dripping red paint. Customers started to disappear, afraid of getting caught in the crossfire. Mike, the mechanic, tried to help. "You should call the cops, Ade," he urged one morning over coffee. Ade just shook his head. "Some things the police cannot fix." He knew this wasn't random hate. It was a strategy. A classic pattern of intimidation, designed to break a person's spirit. He was documenting everything, every threat, every act of vandalism, on an encrypted drive hidden in his small apartment above the diner. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Richie had learned about Ade's late wife, Adana, from a city permit application. He'd found the small framed photo Ade kept behind the counter. The next morning, Ade found the photo nailed to the front door. Someone had used a permanent marker to draw a cruel, smiling face over Adana's. In that moment, something inside Ade shifted. The quiet diner owner retreated, and for the first time in years, the ghost began to wake up. This was no longer about a property dispute. Richie had made it personal. That night, Richie returned with 5 men. They walked in like they owned the place, carrying bats and crowbars. "Last chance, old man," Richie sneered. "Sign the deed over, or we're gonna remodel this dump with your face." Ade was behind the counter, wiping it down with a rag. His shoulders were slumped. He looked defeated. "Please," Ade said, his voice soft. "This is all I have," Richie laughed. "Wrong answer." He nodded to his men, who fanned out, ready to smash the place to pieces. "Let's start with him," Richie said, pointing his bat at Ade. The man who moved was not Adekunle, the diner owner. In a blur of motion, he grabbed a sizzling hot, cast-iron skillet off the stove. The first thug swung his bat, but Ade was already inside the arc, slamming the skillet into the man's jaw with a sickening crunch. The second man charged, and Ade dropped low, hooking the man's ankle with a mop handle and sending him crashing face first into the jukebox. Richie stared, his mouth wide open, as Ade disarmed a third man with a knife, his movements fluid and brutally efficient. Within 30 seconds, 5 men were on the floor, groaning in pain. Ade walked over to the last man, who was crawling for the door. He leaned down and whispered in perfect Yoruba, a language no one in this neighborhood understood. "Tell your boss, the ghost is awake." The video, filmed by a neighbor across the street, went viral overnight. Ade was hailed as a local hero, but the victory was short-lived. Richie's boss was smarter and more dangerous. He hired a team of slick lawyers who immediately flipped the narrative. Suddenly, Richie and his friends weren't thugs. They were concerned local businessmen who were viciously attacked by a violent foreigner. The lawyers held a press conference. "Mr. Adebayo has a history of aggression," one said to the news cameras. This was a racially motivated assault on 5 young American men. The story exploded. Social media turned against Ade. He was no longer a hero. He was a violent immigrant, a menace. Protesters, paid for by the crime boss, appeared outside the Lagos Spoon with signs reading, "Deport Hate." Ade's federal handler, a man named Agent Miller, called him. "It's over, Ade. The mission is blown. We're pulling you out." To the FBI, Ade was now a liability. Extraction meant the crime boss would win. It meant leaving Mike and Sarah and the neighborhood to fend for themselves. Standing alone in his wrecked diner, Ade knew he couldn't run. The ghost didn't run from a fight. He finished it. Ade refused the extraction order. Instead, he called a local news station and agreed to a live interview at a community town hall. The room was packed. On one side sat Richie, his arm in a sling, playing the victim. On the other side sat Mike, Sarah, and a handful of other locals who still believed in Ade. "Mr. Adebayo," the reporter began, "Richie Gallo claims you attacked him without provocation." Ade stood, his presence commanding the room into silence. "He is lying," Ade said simply. He then looked directly at Richie. "Tell me, Mr. Gallo, what business were you and your friends with baseball bats coming to discuss with me at 10 o'clock at night?" Richie stammered, his coached story falling apart under the direct question. Then, Ade played his final card. He connected his phone to the speakers, and the room filled with Richie's voice from a hidden microphone Ade had planted weeks ago. "We'll break him, make the old African run back to his mud hut." The room erupted. In the chaos, Ade wasn't finished. He looked into the main news camera. "My name is Adekunle Adebayo, and I am a proud citizen of this country. This is my home, and I will not be intimidated." Mike and Sarah stood up, followed by the rest of the neighborhood residents, their applause drowning out the protesters. Faced with the recordings and the community's support, Richie's story crumbled. Federal agents, tipped off by Miller, who'd had a change of heart, arrived and arrested Richie and his crew on the spot for extortion and hate crimes. The diner had been saved, but more importantly, the community had found its voice. The Lagos Spoon is thriving today, a symbol of how one quiet man's courage can inspire a whole community. Real strength isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about standing firm for what's right, even when you're standing alone. If you were inspired by Ade's story and believe in the power of the quiet warrior, hit that subscribe button and become part of the Black Fables family. Share this video to spread the message that bullies only win when good people stay silent. Let us know in the comments what you think true strength looks like.